you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Matt LaCroix, and welcome to this exciting webinar on awards. I'm a proud fellow of APHA, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. If you've ever looked at a blank nomination form and thought, where do I even begin? This session's really for you. I'm joined today by an amazing group of veteran award nominees and nominators and evaluators, and can provide a world of advice on all the awards that APHA offers. So first, I have Carrie Allen. She's the past chair of the APHA APPM Award Standing Committee and Fellow Selection Subcommittee. She's reviewed more nomination packets than most of us have ever written. Next, I have Spencer Harp, who's the past APHA APRS president and past co-chair of the APHA APRS Award Standing Committee. He's a passionate researcher, thoughtful reviewer, and all-around strategic mind when it comes to award selection. And then we have Cynthia Boyle, who's an author and longtime member of Successful Strategies to Spotlight Achievement and Recognize Excellence. They're a blueprint for award-winning nominations. She often offers them. She served on the Remington Screening and Selections Committees, contributed letters of support for successful Remington Honor Medalists, and championed at least 2 successful nominations for APHA's honorary president. So we have a lot of experience on this panel today who are going to offer really wonderful wisdom that they've gained over the years. And we're here today because recognizing excellence matters. Behind every award is a story, a legacy, and a contribution that shapes our profession. But those stories don't tell themselves, you do. And this session is a chance to hear directly from those who have written, submitted, reviewed, and received some of APHA's highest honors. We'll walk through what makes a nomination strong, how to structure your case, and why lifting the work of pharmacy professionals, especially those who don't always get the spotlight, is part of the future of the profession. So whether you're a seasoned nominator or this is your first attempt, welcome. We look forward to a great conversation. Please ask questions in the chat. We'll do our best to address them as we go along, but we may address some of them at the end as well. But I want to make sure that you understand that everyone who applies for any award has value, and the excellent stories that come from it are amazing. So some ground rules for today. Please use the raise hand feature on the Zoom toolbar to share a verbal comment. The moderators will be monitoring these cues to call on individuals and share their thoughts. Please use the chat box on the Zoom toolbar to submit questions and comments related to topics at any time during today's session. Make sure you submit them so you don't forget. We want to make sure we address everything you have to say. If you do not wish to be unmuted or want to remain anonymous to other attendees, send a direct message to Brittany and indicate that no mic in your submission. There will be a time for both APHA posed questions and audience open comments, so please be prepared for that discussion. And we will try to enforce a 60-second time limit for each question just so that we can get to as many questions as possible. However, if something does require more conversation, we'll definitely consider it as we go through. Due to the nature of this session, just reiterating, I'm highlighting the following antitrust rules of the association that should be on the screen. If it is an appropriate discussion occurs, I'll first ask for the discussion to stop, and if discussion does not end, we will mute and or remove the individual speaking from the session. Okay, we've said all the formal things, said everything we need to do. That does it for the ground rules. To start the session, let me call on APHA Senior Manager of Awards, Elections, and Fellows, Eben Marti, to walk us through the nominating process and platform. So Eben, take it away.
All right. Eben, if you're speaking, I don't know if we can hear you currently.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Now we can hear you as well.
Beautiful. So the APHA nominations link, 2026 nominations link is going to be available through almost all platforms where you get APHA announcements. So APHA Today on the website, APHA social media platforms, the Pharmacy Today magazines, and pretty much anywhere the community pages where you get APHA information. And so it's going to be a link. Once you click on the link, it should bring you to this interface here. I'm sure most of us are pretty much familiar with it. And then you're going to begin a new submission. So you click here to begin a new submission. It's going to load. So this is going to be real time. So it's going to show you something like this, where you put in your name. I have these auto-populated. If you know your APhA ID, then you can put it in here. So I'm just going to put 01234 as a test. Then my email address, emacs@apha.org. Then title, senior manager, awards, elections, fellows. And then street name, I'm just going to put this random in there, but here you put in your address and all of that. And this first part is the nominee. So whoever is being nominated, or if you are nominating yourself, this is the page where you put all your information and everything. Then evening phone number is going to be, let me just put in this number in here just for test. Then this is where you choose which award category you are going to be submitting the award for. And so this is all the award categories that we have under APhA for both profession-wide, for the pharmacist awards, for the research and science awards. So you go through all of this list, and then whichever award it is that you are applying for, you choose. For these purposes, I'm going to use the fellows. So if you click on the fellows, then you come down, it's going to ask for the nominator's name. So if you are nominating somebody, this is where you put in your information. So then again, I'm just going to put in test, and it's not going to ask you for a lot of information. Your name, your last name, your email address, your phone number, and then your title. So I'm just going to put senior manager here as the title. Then you go save and next. So once you click on save and next, because we selected fellows and this nomination is for fellows, the next button you see up here is going to be fellows. If you had selected any other award category, that is what would have showed up here. Then you read an overview of the award, the description, the nomination process, and everything that comes with it. Then it's going to ask you a series of questions for that particular application. So for fellows, these are specific questions for fellows. If you choose any other, Remington is going to give you specific questions under that. If you choose APP, if you choose Daniel B. Smith, it's going to give you specific questions about that. So for APhA fellows, this is the question it's going to ask you. Is the APhA fellow needs to be a member of APhA for minimum of 10 years. So yes, I'm sure that the person is. Select the community in which the person belongs to. You can select a community. I'm just going to put immunization here. Then you upload a resume, CV, recommendation letters for the person. So this is where this panel is going to drill more and tell you more about what to put together and how to put that together. Then it's going to ask you specific questions. So like I said, depending on the nomination that you're picking, it's going to ask you questions relating to that. So I'm just going to upload tentative files in here, just so we can keep the conversation moving. So I just upload this. Then it's also going to ask me, so you upload all the documents pretty much that you need to put in there. Let me upload this as well. And then the last one, okay, the last two, which is going to be this. And then this as well. So just because it's a test, I'm just putting random documents in there. So once you're done with that, you come down, you answer all the questions. This is a test. This is a test. And then this is a test. So if you get access to this, you see all the questions, and then you can either do this on the back end and then you upload them, or you could type them directly into this. It's a pretty straightforward process. Then you have to attest that yes, the individual has not been found guilty and all of those other ones. Is the nominee aware of their submission? Some nominations come with the nominee aware, some come with the nominee not aware, whichever one it is, you can choose. So I choose this, and then it brings me to the next page, which is save and finalize. So once I do this, it's going to tell you, okay, I'm submitting this. You cannot make any changes anymore. Yes, I agree. If you want to save it and come back to it later, you click on the save and then you come back. So you probably started and you didn't finish, you could save and you can always retrieve it. But this, since you're done, you click on the save. Okay. And then that's it. Information sent. And then you're done with the nomination. So if you go through this process, you run into any issues, you can always email me or you can always send an email to awards@apha.net and then would help you troubleshoot that. That would be it. And over to you, Matt.
Perfect. Thank you. And just to emphasize, if you ever have any trouble with any of the awards things, awards@apha.net is your way to get help and get answers for any of the awards, and they'll get you directed to the right person. So now that we've gone through the technical aspect of submitting an application through the open water system, we're going to get into our expert panel of kind of some of the things that they've seen over the years as being part of this. So, Carrie, I'm going to start with you. So you've served as a member and chair of the APBM Awards Committee and Selection Committee, both for their standing awards and for fellows. So what's something that you look for in an awards packet, and what are things that are making a packet very valuable for you to help you determine award status?
Sure. So I will say there's an award for everything, right? There are some criteria that we're looking at specific to leadership experience or impact versus service to the profession of pharmacy at large versus service to APHA as an association. So I'd say one of the first things that we talk about on either committee is how the nominee matches up with the criteria of that specific award or recognition. So, for example, we've had discussion around whether somebody nominated for a leadership award exemplifies leadership above and beyond other attributes of their application. Same things with the APHA service awards. Some of the profession-wide awards, we're looking for exemplary contribution in a lot of different areas. So first and foremost, does this nominee match up with the award that they are nominated for, or they may be a potential better fit for a different award or recognition? I think across all the different awards, what the committee has always talked about is sustained contribution. So that's to the profession of pharmacy for all of these awards. We are first and foremost pharmacists that are being recognized for our impact on things like patient care, on the advancement of the profession of pharmacy. And then also, because these are APHA awards, what the contribution to APHA itself has been, or APHA Foundation, BPS, some of these associations that are associated with APHA. But mostly, we're looking to see whether somebody who's nominated for an APHA award has been a part of APHA or an active contributor to APHA, in addition to all of the amazing, wonderful things that they do for other associations or in their practice. Where we are looking for this, a lot of times is the CV, but we do rely really heavily on those nomination letters and those letters of support, because the committees are made up of pretty varied background pharmacists. I can only speak for myself, but I work in a pretty niche practice area, and I think that applies to a lot of the committee members as well. So if there are really amazing things that this individual has done that maybe we don't fully understand because we don't practice in that space, those letters are invaluable at being able to show us what the story is about that individual, and speaks to things like their passion and their innovation and creativity with pharmacy that potentially you can't just get from a CV.
Awesome. And I think the point that you made where you said the CV is really kind of a logical explanation of what a person does, and the letters of recommendation are that emotional catch of why it's important. Really playing together is so important in these application packets. So
Absolutely.
thank you. That was great. Spencer, I'm going to come to you next, because being a former president of APHA, APRS, and serving on their awards committee, you really highlight some of the research and academic excellence within the award selection committee. And with that being such an important part of APHA, can you talk about how our awards process really values that aspect of research and discovery and increasing the knowledge around not just direct patient care?
Sure. Thanks. So, as we all learned in school, pharmacy has a huge science basis. And even though the research corner of APHA, as I like to call it, maybe kind of small proportion wise, it's still a very important part of APHA and, advancing the profession. So, for these awards, like you said, Matt, they are there to highlight, emphasize, celebrate those research contributions, both to the association and the profession. So in terms of highlighting that, I'll kind of piggyback on what Carrie said. Some of these people, some of these research aspects are kind of niche. So, if you're nominating somebody else, don't assume that the people on the committee know exactly what's happening. You know, I say make it jump off the page and smack the reviewers in the face so that they can understand what's going on there. And that's part of what the nomination letters are for, both your letter as a nominator and then the letters of recommendation. So use those to your benefit. And even if you're self-nominating, many of these awards are open for self-nominations. And as pharmacists, we don't like to think about that, but that's fine. Because, we're also good at tooting our own horns. But I think that's the big part there is being very clear about how the research or the person's research, or maybe that specific piece of research is, aligning with the association's priorities. So like going to the association's mission statement and vision in the core areas and how that's linked to practice. Because like Carrie said, we are the American Pharmacist Association. Yes, there are people in the organization who are not pharmacists, and that's great. We want them because they're on board with the philosophy and the purpose and the value of pharmacy. But for this research side, it's being clear how what they're doing connects to the professional side of things. And that doesn't mean that everything is going to be practice focused. That's fine. There are some awards, like one of the research awards is from the best paper in the Journal of Pharmaceutical Sciences. It's not my area. That's pharmaceutics and drug development, but that's still relevant to pharmacy. So I think it's, from the highlighting point, look at the requirements for the award itself and how that relates to the different areas and needs and focus areas of the association. Because each award is slightly different. And all that stuff's on the website, so you can see what the focus and the intention of the award is. But it's really the highlighting piece is kind of plugging in those things and making connections so that the review committee can see what's in your brain, because we're not mind readers.
Absolutely. And I want to reemphasize there are awards for every type of member of APHA that are out there. And we invite everyone to apply for them all because they are recognizing excellence across the entire profession, which does bring me over to Cynthia because she's worked on some of the profession-wide awards a little bit more with her work with the Remington Medal selection and screening committees and some of the other places where she's worked. So Cynthia, based on your experience and based on your article and things you've shared before, what are some things you can tell a person nominating for the first time, or maybe a person who has not been successful yet in submitting to these award processes?
All right. Greetings, everyone. Greetings from Maryland, actually. First of all, I just really enjoy getting someone nominated and ultimately recognized for awards. It is really a compliment and it really affirms their contribution. So anyone can do this, but I would say, really think through the process. You're going to need to devote some time to nominate somebody the first time and start with a criteria, think through a timeline, and then also look at previous recipients. So when I think about a timeline, when the awards are opened up in June and the last date of submission is September, it's a little over 2 months. It's time now. And so that plan that I was talking about, this framework of working through a nomination, you can surprise someone with a nomination, but it's really hard to do an effective nomination by surprise. And I think it's a partnership with the nominee and the nominator. So talk through what they've accomplished, be willing to look at their CV. For example, the Bowl of IGEA is recognized in states, but endowed by APHA. And you may have someone with their CV that they haven't really devoted a lot of time to civic engagement, which is the focus of that particular award. So you may be able to point out areas that they could fill in more. You may know of something they left off, and that sometimes happens. But you're planning the packet, you're talking with the nominee about potential letters of support, and you're the one that's organizing that. So you reach out to the nominators, the letters of support writers, and are they willing? Can they meet your timeline? And after talking with your nominee, you'll know what areas you want them to emphasize. For example, if an award is for service, management, and leadership, you would want to pick someone who could speak specifically to each one of those things. Maybe not all three, but at least one. And then when you do get around to writing your champion letter, you'd want to help the people on the committee put everything in that same order. Introduce them, start if it's in that order, then it helps them go through the criteria at the same time. You may also want to draft your letter and wait until you receive the letters of support back, because you can introduce those folks in your letter or include some quotes that really emphasize and highlight some of the things that you think are really unusual and distinctive about your nominee. I could go on, but you see, it is a process. Respect the timeline, and there may be times when somebody who writes a letter of support, maybe you'd want to give them some feedback on that. For example, sometimes they'll send in an email and consider that a letter, and you either want to enhance it or help them with that so that their viewpoint can be represented in the packet.
Absolutely. I think I'm going to spend a little bit of time emphasizing something that was a really constant theme between all three of you, which is those letters of support are critical on how a person is perceived by the committee, because these letters of support are not the same as a letter of support for a job application. If you have a person that you've supported in many different ways in the past, the awards committee criteria is often viewed differently than what you would see for a letter of recommendation for a job or an application to an academic program or something like that. There are specific criteria that we're looking for as the awards committee. It is invaluable to the committee members who are volunteers, who are trying to look through many, sometimes dozens of applications for a single award. If you tell them why this person, based on the criteria that's outlined in the website and in Open Water, in the award platform itself, why they meet those criteria, the less guessing the committee members have to do, the better it is for the person who's being nominated for the award. So when you think about it, it's a different type of writing than what you're used to necessarily doing for a letter of recommendation, like you would do for a student for a residency or a postgrad fellowship or something like that. Is very specific criteria that you're building this letter towards. So I think that would be the thing I would emphasize as you talk about writing these letters, because we get some CVs that are 25 pages long, and if you don't tell me why what's in there is important, as I'm gonna have trouble finding it. Potentially because their quantity is its own quality, but at the same time, I'm looking for very specific things based on the rubrics we use to evaluate awards. So Spencer, I think, said it best. Hit me across the face with what I need to know. Because that saves everyone a lot of time, energy, effort, and it makes it easier to defend when we're going into the committee meeting saying, this is why this person deserves this award. So that's kind of our first round of questions here. We're going to get to question round number 2. So first round was all real positive aspects, things we're looking for. We're going to go in the same order, so I'm going to come back to Carrie. But what are some pitfalls you've seen as a reviewer? Things that made you go, what were they thinking? And they're always supportive, but sometimes it just doesn't quite come across as you want it to. So can you give us maybe some examples or some thoughts on those?
Sure. I don't know, to put everyone's mind at ease, I don't know if I've ever read a nomination packet and thought, oh my gosh, what was this person thinking? So that should be reassuring. However, there are some head scratchers and there are some things that could just be improved. It's not that the nominators did anything incorrectly. It's just fine tuning what they were presenting to the committee. So keeping in mind the committees that are reviewing may or may not know the individual who is being nominated. And in fact, they are encouraged to set aside any prior knowledge of working with that individual. Pharmacy is a small world, APHA is a tiny world, but they're setting all of that aside and they're just focusing on what is presented in the packet to make it fair and equitable for all the reviewers. So if there's something that you think is fantastic about that individual, make sure it's in there. There have been times where, and we've had to talk about it as a committee, but people have brought up things like, oh, this individual has done this previously, and we're looking through the nomination packet and we can't find that anywhere. Maybe the individual just doesn't have it on their CV because they didn't think to put it on their CV. One thing that comes up a lot is that people don't often put their civic involvement or their community service on their CV. That comes up every year. And if it's not in the nomination packet, if it's not in those letters that are talking about the narrative of that person's overall impact, it's kind of lost on us. And for some individuals, that is a really key component of how wonderful and deserving they are for these awards. The other thing that I would say is a semi-common occurrence are letters. Cynthia, you touched on this a little bit, where people think that an email might be a letter, or someone's just putting in a letter of support, but there's not a whole lot in there about the story. So I appreciate people wanting to be objective and stick to the facts in their letters, but that is not the time. So again, we've kind of discussed at a committee, man, does this nominator really think that this person deserves an award just by the tone of their writing? So I will say, bring out your inner enthusiasm and also find those really enthused letter writers who are going to be really excited about writing those letters.
What I always tell people, and Carrie, you can maybe correct me if I'm saying it in kind of a different way. We always get CVs and at least a letter that's full of logic, and we make decisions based on logic, but humans also make decisions based on emotion, and those letter writers bring the emotion to the process. They show us why they care and why this is valuable.
Absolutely. That passion comes through, and conversely, kind of a ho-hum tone also comes through a letter. So it totally matters.
Absolutely. So Spencer, I'm going to ask you the next question, and it kind of goes hand in hand with that, because within the research awards, there's sometimes some very technical things that are highly important to a person's packet, but it's hard to feel that emotion behind it. So how can someone in kind of that field or considering nominees for those awards show in their letters how that emotional connection can come into being?
Yeah, so I think, and again, I'm going to pull together a bunch of parts of my brain here. Like several of you, I've been a reviewer and a nominator and a letter writer. So each of those is kind of a different thing. And one thing that I think we sometimes forget is there's the letter from the nominator, which kind of serves one purpose, and then the letter from the recommenders, which serves a different purpose. And the CV is a third purpose, right? Right. So, from the technical thing, one of the things that I've done when I was the nominator was I carefully tapped the recommenders, like the letters, and I said, you know this person for this reason. Can you speak to this aspect? I'm going to handle the broad strokes as the nominator, but I need you to speak to this one specific thing for whatever reason. And sometimes that allows them to say, okay, I don't have to talk about everything. I just have to focus on this one thing. And that kind of allows their passion to come out, which I've seen the letters when I've done that versus when I haven't, night and day difference. So I think, if you are nominating somebody, or if you're asked to write a letter of recommendation, ask the nominator, is it okay if I focus on one thing? Because that way that person can speak to that specific technical thing and explain why it matters. It almost lets them off the hook from, like I said, covering everything. And like Carrie said, sometimes we get this kind of, oh, this person's great, they deserve the award. That doesn't help, right? We need that very discrete, distinct, clear explanation there. So I think that, and for specific for the research thing on the technical piece, again, remember the nominating panel, I'm sorry, the reviewer panel is going to have a lot of different people on it. Don't assume that they know your area. Kind of like when we're submitting IRB project or IRB submissions and they tell you, write for somebody who's not in your field and be very clear. Same thing here, don't assume that the people are going to be in your field and that they know what you do. Like one example that's come up, especially on the research side, is, the way that some of the rubrics are written, I'm thinking about fellows, they end up inadvertently being heavily academia focused, where, you wrote a paper. That's fine for those of us who are in academia. That's somewhat okay for people in practice. But then you have people in industry, and sometimes they can't write papers because of the way industry works. That doesn't mean they're not making big contributions. So you may, like to that letter of recommendation piece, you may need to specifically have somebody who's within their sphere of, influence or whatever, to say, can you speak to these technical achievements that we don't see through traditional means? So both what they are and why they matter, right? Like having been somebody, when I had to present some of those eWord awards with big long names that I don't even know I know what happens in a cell and that's it. But from, the explanation side, help the nominating committee understand why that matters. So, kind of speak in that kind of, I don't want to say the least common denominator, but least common denominator. So everybody on the nominating review panel can understand. And again, like use your letters of recommendation to your benefit. Help give people, focus on this. You focus on that. And not just a rehash of the CV, because we can all read that, but what does it actually mean? The meaning behind it, that story is what the selection panels and review panels really need, is that the character arc, if you will.
The letters really need to tell a story.
Yes.
That there will be places for the facts. Let the letters tell a story and give permission to tell one part of the story, I think is what I really heard you say.
Yep.
No, you don't have to tell the whole story in one letter.
Right. And like to that point, the place for the facts, that's on the nomination form itself, where you're filling in everything. And the CV supports that. But those letters are what gives us the touchy-feelies that we need to kind of round out the decisions.
Perfect. And I think, Cynthia, you had talked about this for a brief second before, but I really kind of want to go back to it. How should nominators and nominees collaborate effectively? Because I think that's something really important for a lot of our awards.
It is important. And, as you were just talking about the story, that it's the nominee that can give you some insights on the impact or the outcome, not just a list of activities, but what it took to make the change happen, or the advancement, or, legislative advocacy, whatever it is. So that's part of it. We already mentioned that they can suggest, people for letters of support. And then, if you're championing this award packet, then you're helping throughout the process. So you'll follow up with letter writers when everything is submitted. You'll let everyone know, and then follow up when the announcement is made. Then it's time for, when it's official, it's time for congratulations. If someone isn't selected, then you can regroup. You can get some feedback, check with APHA staff, and see what can be improved. I can think of some where it seemed like the nomination came from all sorts of individuals within one school. And sometimes that can't be helped, but the variety of backgrounds, I think, helps support it. And we've talked about the viewpoints for the different letters. If someone isn't successful, then, obviously you check back with that nominee. Is it okay if I nominate you again? And I will say, and we haven't mentioned, some of these awards require at least 2 letters, no more than 6, that kind of range. And you need to think about that strategically. So obviously you meet the minimum. but you're really going by the criteria. Do you need 3 or 4 letters to support the criteria in each of those? If one is subpar, and like Carrie said, that's very rare, maybe you have extras. Maybe you submit the 4 excellent ones plus your nominator letter, and that's a fine packet. So you'll pay attention to that also. But anyway, I think it's fun to do it. If someone doesn't get it, then they feel very affirmed that you thought enough to go through that, because it does take a lot to put these together. And if you're doing a letter support, the same thing. So try again. These are competitive very generally, and relook at the criteria, because maybe the award you picked didn't match the best. Maybe there's another one, and you could talk to other people in APHA and get some advice on that also. But I wish you luck on your nominations.
And I think there's 2 points that between Carrie and Cynthia and Spencer really hit home to me as a person who's reviewed so many of these awards myself. Is one, don't worry about who writes the letter of recommendation. I don't care about their titles or credentials. That doesn't matter to me at all. Make sure they're part of your story. Pick someone who can tell your story. We're gonna get into a little Hamilton on the 10th anniversary here, but you get to choose who tells your story in this case. So do that. Pick the people that you can. So that's number 1. And number 2, reapply for awards if you don't get them the first time. Committees change, makeup changes. There's always a big flux, and just because a committee, I'm gonna go to fellows on what the times when I've done the fellows committee. We're only allowed to pick so many fellows in any given year, and you might have been number 11. And we have no way of showing if you're 11 or 27th or whatever the number might be that year. It just is a matter of apply again. And it could be you are a great candidate. It just the rankings, the way the rubrics worked out, you are just next in line. So be next in line and apply again. So those are the 2 things that I think would be my areas where if you're feeling discouraged, really make sure you're telling the story well with who you're picking and like your recommenders, and making sure you go back to do it again, because I can think of at least 2 or 3 people who've applied 2 or 3 times, and the 3rd time was where that award was given to them. They were always excellent. It just, however the committee worked out, that it was just not their time at that moment.
And Matt, can I jump in real quick on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Not to throw shade at some of our fellow organizations, but some of the other pharmacy organizations have much larger classes of fellows each year, and their processes are very different. APHA has made the decision, going several years back, to limit it. And so to me, that makes, the designation of fellow that much more special, because, we don't have 40 people inducted as fellow every year, it's 15. So, it can be competitive. And what Matt said is very important. You may have been number 11. That's not, it's not personal. That's just how things shook out. So please try again. So, there have been discussions, should we expand it? Should we keep it the same? I think it's nice the way it is, because it highlights, that how special it is. And, it's really based on your achievements and contributions. So, if you apply or if you're nominated and you don't get it, it's not personal. There's so many different things that fit into this with the constellation of reviewers and applicants and all that kind of stuff. So please try again. Yeah.
So we've given all our panel a couple of rounds of questions here. So we're going to give them a quick break from me asking the questions. And turn it over to the audience to see if there's any questions that you guys may have want to ask that we haven't had the opportunity to think of, or just from a different perspective, since we've been all doing this for a little while at different points in time. And if you're too afraid to talk online, you can put it in the chat and we'll take it there too.
They haven't received any direct messages, Matt. So just to
Perfect.
relay that as moderator. So we do have a hand raised, it looks like.
Excellent.
Can we talk about confidentiality here a second in the process?
We're gonna let Dixie talk first, okay, Cynthia,
Okay,
and then
sure.
we'll come back. So Dixie, go for it. I think
Cynthia.
you can mute yourself and go.
And this is this won't interfere with Cynthia's question, so, or statement about confidentiality. I just want to ask, you know, for those of us in a certain generation before schools of pharmacy were really good about making sure their students knew to put very detailed information in their CVs, and maybe we've been winging it for 30 years. What's your suggestion when you don't have a lot of details about the service? Like, you know, you did certain things, especially within APHA, but maybe you have no idea what year it was or when it was, and there's no record of that anymore. So on the nomination form, you want that information. So is there certain wording, or should we guess? Like, what's your suggestion in those kind of cases where the service was there, we just don't know specifically when it was?
I have my personal opinion. Does anybody else on the panel have a thought here?
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Go. Perfect. I think that's a really good spot. Thank you for the comment, first off. But that's a really good spot where some of the letters talking about what you've done can really document that for you. Even if there's not a specific year you can remember. As much as we ask nominators to try to categorize things for us, I know for me, sometimes, you know, non-academic CVs are not going to be the same as an academic CV. Just there's different rules and different roles for everybody. So I use those letters from recommenders to fill in the gaps sometimes that I would put as an academic working at a university versus somebody who's been in the industry for 30 years who isn't going to necessarily document their workload the same way. But those letters can tell the story and say, you know, Dixie, I know I've worked with Dixie in APHA. She's been a mentor for students for a ton of years. She was on this committee at one point. That way it gets around worrying about specific years and more to what you've done in total, if that makes sense.
And I've also seen on the nomination form, like the fields, like if you don't know the exact year, I've seen people put like 1999-ish, you know, or something, so that it's clear that it's because, you know, we're off on that bucket. Something happened in the dark ages, or, you know, pre-COVID, which what does that even mean? So we can't remember the year, but you know what happened at some point. You know, if you can put ranges or narrow it down, you know, and like Matt said, the letters of recommendation, those help, you know, because it's not like a lot of those things we're not going back and go, whoa, you said 1994, the person said 1995, big X, you're out. You know, it's kind of a, you know, ballparkish, just verification that this actually happened. I think that's what we're looking for. So, and for everybody on the call, don't let the lack of specific knowledge of the date prevent you from nominating somebody or even putting it down. If you can give us something, that's what we need.
That was a great
Thank you,
question.
that's helpful.
Cynthia, do you want to go back to your confidentiality question?
Yeah, I would like to. You know, as enthusiastic as we are about the whole process, it's still, you should treat it confidentially. If someone isn't selected, they may not want it broadcast that they weren't picked this time, or there may be somebody who treats this very ethically. Maybe they've been asked to contribute a letter of support for 2 different nominations, and you know they have to think it through where their letter be most effective, and be honest about that. And then obviously not spreading the word until the announcements are made at the end. But there are just times when you just want to be sensitive to that and know that, you know, that people are doing their best to recognize people using the criteria. And as a nominator or as a letter writer, you may not know the exact criteria that the committees are using. So that's why you just want to, you know, make your, you know, really target the letters and make sure you've covered it. The CV is thorough. All of those will help them do their jobs.
Excellent. Brittany, do you see any other questions here before we kind of move to last minute comments?
No direct messages coming with any questions, but just to acknowledge there was a question in the chat around whether this recording was going to be shared, and just to confirm that, yes, that is the intent.
Perfect. Awesome. So, we've kind of opened questions. If you have other questions and you think of them as we're giving these last minutes, please put them in the chat or raise your hand and we will for sure get to them. But I'm going to give everyone 1 minute speed round to go. What final message you have for the people that are watching this either live or in the future? Will you tell someone who's nominating for the first time, or what's your one piece of advice that they need to cling on to when they leave this conversation? So I'm going to start with Carrie because you've been first all day.
Sounds good. We'll just keep it going. So something that hasn't come up yet, but I think is so important is on behalf of these committees and selection committees. People are on these committees because they're so excited to recognize colleagues, fellow pharmacists, people who are inspiring. They really want to tell stories, and they want to get really excited about things that people have done. So just to reassure you, when you're nominating, you are sending these letters to a group of individuals who are so excited to learn about your nominee and are really rooting to hear the passion and the reason behind why this person is so deserving. So you are selling your nominee, but you are not trying to convince a group of stone cold individuals that this person should get it. We are very much in the mindset of wanting to share as much as possible about all these individuals.
Absolutely. We love celebrating excellence. Like, you're not on an awards committee if you don't want to celebrate excellence. That there's just no reason to be there. So I absolutely agree with that statement. Spencer, for any last words of wisdom from you here?
Everything that Carrie said. We want to recognize people. I can think of a time where there was somebody that we knew in our heart of hearts was deserving, but the criteria and what was provided didn't support that. And we mental gymnastics to try to help, and it just didn't work out. So we're very much on the side of support. We want this to happen for nominees. Other than that, just do it. If you think you want to dominate somebody, submit it. Yes, there's a lot of stuff to pull together. You're not alone. It's very much a group effort. And sometimes it's nice for us to be surprised. Sometimes it's not. So, if in doubt, just do it. It's a process, but it can be very rewarding, even if the nominee or you aren't selected.
And Cynthia?
Yes, I was thinking there's a big adjustment, especially for student pharmacists as they transition to become new practitioners and in the profession on their own. And so that some of the things that are on CVs will no longer be as persuasive. So you might want to get some feedback as those things happen. And it takes a while to accumulate those kinds of activities that would be appropriate for certain awards. So it does take time, but there are a lot of awards that are targeted to people who don't have as much time in profession. There may be something on innovation or something you contributed in one of the communities. So, really targeting, the criteria and work with other people. I know Dixie spoke earlier in our state association. She and I often strategize about different people to nominate, or either for the state or for APHA and other awards. So find your friends, that can help you do this.
Perfect. And I think finding your friends is actually even a bigger network for me. There are, I can think of dozens from all the years I've done the awards committee, people that may not be on awards committee anymore, but if you feel like I just want someone who's been through this experience and can help me put this packet together a little bit, reach out to the APHA staff at the awards email that we've been talking about, and they can probably put you in touch with someone who's not necessarily not on the committee this year, who's not part of the review process for this year, but maybe can give you some wisdom as to how to better format or how to kind of think through the process. Because as Cynthia said, having that champion, you driving it, just because you're the champion doesn't mean you're not the only one on there, the only one on the team. There's everyone there to help support. And like we said, awards committee members want people to win awards. We want to help you win the awards and get them set up so that we can be celebrating you when we get to the annual meeting, this case in Los Angeles, so that we can have a wonderful time and see the excellent stories that we're having. So don't be afraid to reach out for help. This is not a silo. This is not a single person's workload. This is everybody together because we are, as Carrie said, pharmacy is a small world. APHA is tiny, and we all want to support and our success that we had. Um, it, just real quick for that first time nominator. Do you have any wisdom for them? Because we've talked about a lot of experience, but that first time person who's probably a little bit more scared about doing this. Any words of wisdom from anybody?
Don't save it until you're ready. Don't submit it until you're ready. You can revisit what you've submitted. You can change your nominator letter if you haven't submitted it. So, especially at the end, you have a chance to review things that are submitted.
And just to reinforce what Matt said, if you're a first-time nominator, please reach out to somebody who's been on one of these selection committees before. It's not a conflict for us to share insight on process and high-level things like, here's the stumbling blocks. This is what successful things look like. That will help you tremendously. I know the first time I submitted a nomination, that helped me tremendously. Or even like if it's your first time, say, I don't want to nominate, I can write a letter so that you can kind of get into the process. So seek out support, and feedback early on, and don't wait until the day before nominations close, because like we said, this is a process. This is not like cramming for a therapeutics exam. Well, I guess it is. You can't cram for it. So give yourself time.
And I would say too, we have criteria for these awards, but please don't not nominate somebody just because they don't look exactly like somebody who has won that award before. People do amazing things in a really wide range of areas. And so if you have somebody who meets the criteria, but maybe looks a little different than somebody who's won that award before, go ahead and do it just the same. They might be a unique individual that I assure you is equally deserving of that recognition.
Right. And I think don't wait till last minute is always the best advice for this award process. If you wait till last minute, it gets very, very hard to get everything organized, because I always find when the champion helps develop a story, not that you need a theme, but if everything looks like it's together, it helps the packet overall just as a reader. It doesn't mean that they're changing the criteria at all. It just is, I can understand the view from all the different points, from the letters, the nominators, the CV, how we're getting to this award for this person, even if they don't fit what somebody else, like Carrie said, fit, a prior winner's background. I can see your story fitting this background or this award criteria with however it is, because everyone kind of came together for it. So I really do think that champion role is really important for it. So I'm going to offer my sincere thanks to my colleagues and all of you who joined us today for this Mastering the Nomination session. We truly appreciate your time, attention, and thoughtful engagement. As the voice of pharmacy, APHA sees these conversations as an opportunity to empower our members with tools, resources, and real stories that inspire action and recognition across the profession. Please know what your voice matters. APHA is committed to continuing this dialogue and uplifting excellence and sharing practical ways to spotlight the incredible work being done across pharmacy. Be on the lookout for the recorded link to the session in your inbox and the opening of the 2026 awards nomination on June 16th. As always, we hope to count on you to spread the word, nominate yourselves, and encourage others to nominate before the September 8th deadline. If you have any questions or feedback, email them to awards@aphanet.org. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to do those. We will get those out to everybody as well. And thank you for everyone for what you do for your patients, your peers in the profession. We hope today's session was valuable, and we look forward to staying connected with you.
Thank you.